Radio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cryptocurrency. Your host here, Richard Carthon. And today we have another special one for you. One of the things that I think is very important is looking to a path to sustainability and making sure that not only we're moving towards greener energy, but we're finding a way to keep our energy more sustainable. So not only are today's guests being able to speak to that, but they have something really cool that I think you're all going to be interested in learning more about. So today we have DaCosta, who's the CEO of ACDC. We also have David Yi, who's the CCO of ACDC as well. How are you both doing today?
Great, thank you.
Doing really well. Thank you for having us.
No problem. Well, before we dive into today's conversation, let's learn a little bit more about both of you. Alex, I'll start with you. Can you give us some background on yourself?
Sure. So I'm originally from Toronto, which is also where David is. I spent my career on the fixed income side in banking. And so always focusing on structured products, securitized products, anything with a mortgage. And I eventually pivoted and was running ESG and impact investing at a firm where David and I used to work, and really wanted to focus on thinking about how to finance more unique companies, earlier stage companies. And so that's where, my introduction to the world of Bitcoin and the intersection of power really came to be.
Awesome. How about yourself, David?
Yeah, so I also have a finance background, have been in the banking industry for over a decade. I was advising mostly companies in the metals and mining space, but pivoted to cover the crypto industry. That's where I've been out since our last gig as well. So in that role, I was raising capital, advising a lot of crypto companies. And I got the bug a little too strong and decided to jump and start up our own company here.
Yeah, I find that a lot of people who, once they start doing research into this space, they go down the rabbit hole and they kind of don't look back. So what was that first introduction to the crypto space for you, David? Like, when did you first learn about it? And when did you decide, okay, this is the direction I want to head?
Yeah, I'm not too proud of this history, but, early on, like I said, I was covering the gold space, and when Bitcoin was first introduced to me, that was probably in 2012, 2013. And at the time, there was a dark kind of shadow being covered on the space. And so it took me a long time to learn more about it. But I've been introduced to it early on. And then as it got more adopted, as it moved more mainstream and away from some of the kind of darker pockets of the web. I totally got the bug and have been supporting it ever since.
Awesome. So you got in around 2012 and learning ever since. How about yourself, Alex?
So mine's a little different. I'd obviously been following it kind of from the beginning. A lot of my peers had jumped ship really early. And to be honest, I was skeptical because, as David mentioned, it was these kind of dark spaces. And, I'm sitting here on Wall Street going, that can't be real. There's no way. It doesn't make sense to me. And so it was, for me, the real kind of transition started happening in the late teens. And I hate to say it like this, but it was more about, wow, this isn't really going away. Maybe I should be the one learning a lot more about it. And for me, though, the true kind of aha moment was when I was able to interact with it in ways that I think were a little bit more comfortable to me. So actually David played a big role in that, right? So this banking and relationship that we had, and recognizing that a lot of these crypto companies, they have the same needs and the same kind of operations as many other companies. And the downfall was that they couldn't access a lot of the traditional banking sector in the same way. And so for me, all of a sudden it was, oh, wow, I've seen this before. My background was in the mortgage space, where you had brand new projects starting up and people saying, there's no way that mortgage makes sense. It's like, well, it can if you do it differently. And so for me, I think it was unfortunately having to be able to see something that maybe I recognized before I was able to really go down the rabbit hole. But I'm glad I did.
Definitely. And it's interesting that sometimes you have to have a friend, someone who's on the inside seeing it and being able to explain, like, hey, like, this might be something you really want to look deeper into. Even myself, how I got into the space, I was working at an AI company, and first day on the job, I said, hey, what do you know about Bitcoin and Ethereum? I said, what's that? said, look into it. I did, and kind of gave me some good first steps and went down the rabbit hole and haven't looked back. So it's cool to have someone on the inside that can kind of help get you up to speed and go from there. But knowledge is very important. So that kind of brings us into now with what you're building with sustainability and computing infrastructure. So you have Aspen Creek Digital Corporation, which is ACDC. What is it, and what are you currently working on?
Sure. So ACDC was really started with kind of two goals. Number one was, how do we capitalize on the massive power needs of Bitcoin mining to help stand up new renewable power projects? And then the flip side of that is, how do we really take advantage of these new renewable power projects to ensure that as a company we have access to long-term, cheaper renewable power, which really de-risks your profile as a Bitcoin miner or a hosting counterparty. And so that's what we set out to do, was we really set out to think about how can we make sure that we can intertwine ourselves with the power side, in this case, predominantly solar development, to help make sure that brand new solar is being stood up. So not just going and looking for an existing renewable power project, but actually being the reason that a brand new solar development is able to stand up, and then always interacting with the grid, which then helps kind of the monetization of that solar. It helps make sure that we can be a lot more stable, et cetera. But it was a new concept. There are varying degrees of people claiming that they'll use terms like behind the meter, vertically integrated, et cetera, et cetera. But this approach of creating a company with the express purpose of being the catalyst for new power is something that we hadn't seen in the Bitcoin space before.
So taking that approach, trying to be the catalyst for power, and even choosing solar, I think that's a very interesting choice. I mean, sun's going to be here. It's going to be supplying power. And there's been a lot of turmoil around Bitcoin mining and how not great it is for the environment. So basically being able to find a way to turn it on its head. So David, can you kind of walk us through like what made you choose to go the path of solar, and how is it also being beneficial potentially for the environment?
Yeah, so solar is obviously one of the options when we talk about cleaner sources of energy. If you look at across the landscape, we're not solar only supporters. We love solar, we love wind, we love battery projects, we love other renewable project power developments as well. I think when we looked at the landscape and you saw nuclear as an option, that's highly regulated, very, very long development timelines. It just wasn't as actionable to build a business model around in the short term. You look at hydro projects, which are also, great projects, but for the most part, hydro dams are being built where there is excess power available. And, there are obviously other concerns around the viability around the long-term nature around hydro projects. They're extremely capital intensive as well. And so you need to have a very, very strong business plan in order to execute on that. And so how we kind of resulted on solar and then eventually wind is there are a lot of new projects being built across the world today. And there are significant advantages partnering Bitcoin mining with those developments. So for us, it was really just a market opportunity. We saw that there was a tremendous kind of supply of projects that we could add value to. And we've kind of created a secret little mechanism, secret sauce for us to be able to go and do that I think others, struggle to figure out how to implement. That's kind of pulling on our vast experiences, people on Wall Street having worked on transaction structuring, working on legal structuring, being able to take the lessons learned on what we've done in other industries and apply it in this new space and bring a level of professionalism that I think hasn't quite been brought into Bitcoin mining yet.
So as a person who's listening to this, is the approach that ACDC is taking is all of us have to use energy for our homes and everything else that we have going on. Are you then going to some of these potential energy providers saying like, hey, we have this extra solar. Hey, we have this wind energy. We can provide it back to your grid at this discount. And is that the sale, or is it like, hey, we can do that. We also with you helping us, we also can provide Bitcoin to you. Like, can you kind of walk us through that of like, how does that structure work, right? So if I'm in the middle of Tennessee and I am a power energy company and you're like, hey, we actually have these things, here's how we can help. How would that work?
Sure. So the way that power developments typically operate is that if you are a solar developer, as some of our founding partners and equity partners are, they will go find a site that is first geographically appropriate for solar. And then you will go to the local grid, to the utility, and say, I want to stand up a very large project, 200 megawatts, let's say. And they might say, well, we're in the middle of Tennessee. Like, we don't need that much additional power. So I'm glad that you find it sunny here, but we could only really use about 50 megawatts. And so that's actually why this company was started, was the solar developer has two options there. They could say, okay, I could build a smaller one and I could sell it just to the kind of local grid. Or I could build a bigger one, but I'm going to need to find somebody to take that excess power for now. And so that's where we step in. There are areas where you're going to have some really large, very well-known corporation that wants to buy that power directly for themselves. And in that case, you're not going to see ACDC competing. We're not taking on Google here. But there are interesting projects that are maybe really far away from kind of city centers where you would typically see, for example, a hyperscale data center, right? So that it doesn't make sense for Google to be there, but we can operate a little further afield in West Texas or in Colorado, which is where we currently are. We're also outside of Houston. And so in that case, we'll say, look, I'll take the excess power and I'll structure what that transaction looks ahead of time so that you, solar developer, have a better sense of how this project looks at the finish. And what the utility loves about that is that they know that we're going to take our share of the power. They know what they can expect. And they also know, and we're not the only ones doing this in ERCOT in Texas, but they also know that on days when the grid gets funky because of weather, because of nat gas prices, because of what have you, and power prices go through the roof, they know that we can actually turn ourselves off. And not only are we going to give our power back to the grid, whatever we were meant to take from the grid, but we can also send back the entirety of the solar that we would typically be consuming. And so we are a net adder to the grid. And I think that that's what's really important about this story. And that's the kind of value add for ACDC as a company when we interact with these power folks. I think the final piece of that, and you're seeing a lot of Bitcoin mining struggling with this, is that if you show up in Texas right now, where it's already a little bit of a strained grid on certain days, and you say, I'd like to show up and I'd like to take another gigawatt off your hands, that's the last thing they need right now, is yet another consumer of power that's going to shoot prices up. In our case, we're saying, hi, I'd like to show up and I'd like to bring you brand new power and connect it to you. And that's a very welcome change to the problems that they've been facing.
Yeah. Definitely. I live in Austin, Texas, and unfortunately, the last 2 years we've had some freezing challenges that have come up where people have lost power, and energy. Not just here, even looking overseas, looking at what's happened over in Europe as a reflection based on what's happening in the war in Ukraine and Russia. There's an energy crisis all over the place. So finding opportunities to be able to provide energy back to the grid is going to be and is right now its own challenge, and is going to continue to be its own challenge, especially as we get further and further away from crude. For your company and how you're setting this up, it sounds like such a great value add that it's like, why wouldn't you want to do this? What's some of the challenges that you're having to face while some of these things are getting set up?
Whew. How long do you have? Go ahead, David.
I mean, I think the biggest challenge really is just we're kind of in uncharted territory in terms of how the grid will operate, right? We have not had a system that has had a very, very large mix of intermittent renewable power generation. And so solar doesn't produce power 100% of the time, and wind doesn't either. It can't be relied on as much as something like hydro from a renewable standpoint, which you can obviously store in a dam and continue to use whenever. So I think what we're finding now is we have to work as partners with the grids and the utilities so that they can understand exactly how we operate, how our solution actually operates like physically from a engineering standpoint, so that they can rely on what we're telling them, saying, this is exactly how we're going to behave in these types of events. So I think it's going to be a learning process. I think grids across the world are going to have to kind of struggle through this, right? They're not going to get it perfect. And you see that in Europe, right? They made a big bet on renewables. And then with this war in Ukraine, it's really, hampered their ability to be able to be self-sufficient from an energy standpoint. So we need to make sure that as we're working with utilities and grids, that we're kind of like an open book and saying, this is exactly how we want to operate. And this is how we can be integrated within your kind of portfolio solution on how to provide power. Because the last thing we want to do is result in higher power prices, right? The goal of this is so that we can reduce power prices, increase grid stability, increase grid resiliency, and we ultimately be good stewards to our community.
So with being able to provide this extra energy back, again, one of the challenges that comes up over and over again around Bitcoin mining is that it's not necessarily good for the environment. However, y'all have positioned it in such a way that you're actually making energy cheaper. And then you're also in the background, mining something that I believe will have long-term storage of value. So as you're building this out, can you kind of walk us through for some of the locations that you have? I think you said Colorado and Texas and whatnot. How have those operations been going? Can you kind of give us like a use case of how it's been?
Sure. I mean, the nice thing is that this concept that we had down on paper is now coming to life. So a perfect example is our second site, which is called Longbow. It is southwest of Houston. We had our first big test of curtailment, right? The ability to turn on and off over the holidays in December. As a resident, you'll recall, temperatures plunged. Everyone was worried that we were going to have a repeat of Winter Storm Uri with prices going up into the many thousands of dollars. And so we made a decision to curtail and turn off. And therefore, we were not only not drawing on our allotted power from the grid, but we were pushing back all of the solar that we would typically draw to the local grid. And in this case, we're very close to Houston. And so we ended up contributing back enough power. It was the equivalent of 10,000 Houston area homes. So, selfishly, why did we do it? Well, because we are drawing some power from the grid, and therefore getting out of those power prices ways is a good thing for our business model. But it did have a material impact on the local grid, on those power prices, and on the ability to power more things that need to be powered, like homes. So that's been really exciting. We also work really closely with the utility in Colorado, where we have a little bit of a different model, but they can kind of tell us a day ahead if they're going to need our power. In that case, that power goes all the way to California. So you really are seeing a direct impact of our ability to be a flexible load. And I think what's really important here is that it is so easy to pick on Bitcoin mining. Everyone says, oh, it's terrible for the environment. Well, the reason people say that is because it uses a lot of power. I can tell you a lot of things that use a lot of power. I think that what's underlying here is this judgment of what is the power being used for. So if you want to take it a step further, if you don't want to get into a debate about Bitcoin mining, what you can get into a debate about is that we are proving out how to have a flexible load, a data center right now that's for Bitcoin mining, interact with an intermittent power source, solar, and what needs to happen in order to make that a more dependable relationship, and then build on that. What else can we apply that to? Bitcoin mining is just the science project. And so that's, I think, what's really exciting about this is that we are showing that we're having a direct impact on the local grid. And then we think about, okay, well, what else could this use case be applied to?
Yeah, and one thing I would add is, I don't think we mentioned our typical structure. So usually when we build our data centers, we'll size the renewable power generation in excess at a larger scale than our data center. So for example, at our Longbow facility, it's a 30 megawatt data center, but that's attached to an 87 megawatt solar farm. So while the sun is shining and we're producing 87 megawatts, we're sending 57 megawatts of power to the grid every single day, right? And so that is a net benefit in addition to our ability to curtail. Is by virtue of us literally standing up the site, we've now, financed a project that's sending and adding an additional 57 megawatts, up to 57 megawatts of power during solar hours. And I think that makes a meaningful difference to power prices in that area.
And I think what's really interesting about all of this is, and for the people who typically aren't in mining and aren't in renewable energy and can listen to this conversation and understand like, oh my gosh, like looks like there are more than one ways to do Bitcoin mining and have it not just benefit the local energy by making it cheaper, but also can be a sustainable model that can scale. For that person or a group of people who like are listening to this and they're like, wow, this sounds really cool. Like, and I either want to learn more or I want to find ways that like I can participate with ACDC. Like, what does that pathway look like?
So from a learning more perspective, you can go to our website, acdigitalcorp.com. We're on Twitter, ACDC_HQ. David and I are both on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. You can follow us there. I think there's a couple of other ways to get involved. I mean, obviously, if you've got an interest in this, reach out to us. We're growing pretty quickly. We also are really pleased to partner with a couple of wonderful hosting counterparties. So if someone is really into Bitcoin mining, Compass is our largest counterparty at our Texas site, right? They are Bitcoin mining for the retail community. So if you want to, mine Bitcoin on your own and you really want to be part of the renewable play, hit our buddies up at Compass. They've been an incredible partner. And I think they're really excited to be part of, kind of something new. For them, it's a great, hedge on power prices, but it's also a really accessible story for the retail Bitcoin mining community. And also I think...
Sorry, I just want to give a quick shout out to Compass Mining. I've gone to a couple of their networking events here in Austin, and I've had nothing but great experiences every time. So just wanted to quickly say that. Sorry to interject.
No, us too. I think the last part is getting involved in the dialogue, around Bitcoin mining, getting involved in the dialogue around power. I think, not to make this political, but sadly, so much of this is getting politicized. And it probably shouldn't be. Power should not be political. And so I think that the more we can kind of make these conversations mainstream, right? And it doesn't have to be, oil versus renewable. I mean, hell, look at Texas. We're there. We're growing. They're embracing this new technology because they're recognizing that there is a contribution to grid stability. I actually give them a lot of credit where they really are starting to embrace new technologies. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for improved dialogue and improved understanding. I mean, I think coming full circle, we said at the beginning, right? David and I, and you too, Richard, like our first introductions to Bitcoin were what coin, right? And I think there's still a very large percent of the population that is there, really doesn't understand it. And so it's very easy to discard it and discount it. So I would say, keep getting involved, bring it mainstream.
Absolutely. Well, definitely thank you for the ways that people can go and learn more and find ways to get involved with ACDC. I want to wrap up with a couple fun questions. David, I'll pass it to you first. With all the information that you now have, having started ACDC, if you could go impart a piece of wisdom to yourself when you first started, what would you say?
Oh boy. So I think just this, so taking a step back, this is the first time that I've ever kind of left the corporate world to start or to venture off into the startup world. And one piece of wisdom that I would say, and I'm very fortunate that this worked out in my case, is make sure you're partnered with the right people. People can make every single difference when you're starting a business. Make sure that they're people that you can trust, and that people are people that are willing to work hard and be partners with you. That's probably the number one thing that I've learned in this whole process, is that with a strong team, you could usually get through most issues.
Awesome. How about yourself, Alex?
Oh, I echo what David said. I would add that you have to believe in what you are doing. I think similar to David, I was very jarred by the transition from perhaps more frustration to more anxiety. And that anxiety comes from a place of me caring so much and all of us caring so much, right? There's no moment that this company and this opportunity is not on our minds, in our dreams. It's a sad reality sometimes. But the flip side is I wouldn't change it for the world. And I think David's right. The people, when I am in the waking hours, I feel anything is possible because of this team. And it's also because I really do believe in it. And I think that if I had gone to another opportunity just for a name, a title, or this or that, I would have been out in about 2 days. So that's what I've learned. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have learned that.
I think those are two great lessons, especially for people who are listening to this, making the transition from your typical corporate opportunity over into the startup life, whether it's in Web3, Web2, anywhere, has its own set of challenges. And so especially building and doing things bearish, bullish, market, all the same, it is a grind. And I think these are really helpful reminders. So thank you both for those comments. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up here and finish with some final thoughts. So David, I'm going to pass it to you first, and then Alex, you can bring us home. What is a final thought that you want to leave with everyone?
Yeah, the final thought is every single day we see more and more people adopting Bitcoin, and we see more interesting use cases being brought up. I don't want to get into the weeds of kind of this new inscription ordinals thing, but I mean it's exciting, and there's always new innovations coming through, and as the world continues to adopt it, I'm reading reports, and there's certain African countries that need to rely on Bitcoin. I think we're still at the early days of where we can be, so I remain very, very optimistic about the future potential about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree. I'll build on that and bring in, a little bit of this new power technology into it. I think that the market that we all just survived last year was an unfortunate kind of forest fire. And you see it every 10 years or so. And there's already some pretty cool new growth coming out. But I think we had every opportunity to squash this Bitcoin thing once and for all last year. And that's not the case. Right? It is absolutely here to stay. It is a store of value. It is a very, very strong message that I think, to David's point, there's some very cool technologies coming out of it. And I'm pretty excited to see how we can capitalize on that innovation to start bootstrapping innovation in areas like power, which have historically been so slow moving, so expensive, controlled by a couple of folks, and just really having no room for true innovation. So I'm really excited to start seeing these two worlds collide a little bit more, and what we can build from it.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity for what we can build. And I definitely appreciate both of your final thoughts. And for everyone listening, again, if you want to go learn more information, you can go to acdigitalcorp.com. Make sure you go check out all of their different social media links. Follow Alex and David over on either Twitter or LinkedIn. And if you want to get and participate, ask more questions, etc., make sure you contact them as well. Alex, David, thank you again for being on the show, sharing all the incredible information. And as always, for everyone listening at home, stay cryptocurrent.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Cryptocurrent. Cryptocurrent is a cryptocurrency and blockchain education platform that's bridging the gap between the curious newcomers who are just discovering the space and the thought leaders who are shaping its future. All opinions expressed by Richard Carthon, the Cryptocurrent team, and their guests on this show are exclusively their own opinions. This show and any other Cryptocurrent production is exclusively for informational purposes.